The Tennessee Titans have wasted no time in free agency, putting all of that cap space to work, signing big name players and trading for a superstar player from the defending champions. We have a lot to cover today. Welcome to the All Things Titans podcast. My name is Jonathan Miller. Let's jump in. Let's talk about free agency really quick. We have 8 new players to the team, not including star cornerback L'Jarius Sneed, who of course is pending a physical that he'll certainly pass. But as of right now, 8 new players to the team, Tony Pollard being the first. Kind of a surprising signing, I think, for most Titans fans. I think most people were expecting the Titans to try to go and get a Derrick Henry replacement. But this move makes a lot of sense. If Titans fans or anybody who's been watching the Titans play over the past couple of years have noticed, whenever Derrick Henry trots onto the field, it's pretty telegraphed what the Titans are going to do, right? It's like if it's 3rd and 1 and Derrick Henry trots on the field, it's like, okay, we know where the ball's going. This way, Tony Pollard has a very similar game to Tyjae Spears. Their games kind of complement each other. Tony Pollard, a much better pass blocker as well, which is going to help Will Levis and this struggling offensive line tremendously. But very similar play styles to Tyjae, so you can kind of interchange them and not really worry about having a hiccup on offense, which I think is a really big deal. Tony Pollard, of course, coming off of nursing a leg injury going into this season, the 2023 season, and then kind of had, a wonky season. People are expecting him as the bell cow, if you will, that he was going to take a big jump, and I think his injury really gave him some issues there. But regardless, huge signing. I think it's going to really help balance the offense and the running game, which is going to look very different in 2024 for the Titans. Moving along, some of the following signings: Chidobe Awuzie. You gotta add that little accent onto it. Chidobe, a huge signing as well. This was kind of looking like cornerback 1 for a little bit. I think we all knew that the Titans were not done adding in the cornerback room, which they certainly weren't. But regardless, a fantastic player. Definitely is going to play the outside opposite of L'Jarius Sneed and is going to just be a complete upgrade at cornerback here. Really excited about that signing. Kenneth Murray, inside linebacker for the Chargers, former 1st-round pick. One of the most athletically gifted players coming out of college, but of course just hasn't really been able to put it together. I think that's mostly because of scheme fit. I don't want to necessarily attack him as a player. I think he's underperformed, of course. In this Denard Wilson defense, I think he's going to be able to do what he does best, which is just fly to the ball. Not necessarily have to sit back, be the green dot wearer, and be kind of the eyes and ears of the defense. We'll see. We'll see how he develops. I think he'll probably be a scheme fit and he'll be able to take that next step, but we'll see kind of how that pans out. Of course, Calvin Ridley being a huge signing. If you guys watched my first video, I talked about how Calvin Ridley was my top free agency target. I think he adds a ton to this offense. Taking a look at how the Jaguars used him last year, I don't think they necessarily put him in the best position to be the best player that he can be. There needs to be a dominant X, somebody who's going to be a big body, go up and get it type of player. Calvin Ridley gets to be the do it everything player. I think he runs the best curl in the league, no doubt. One of the best route runners in general. Can run basically everything in the route tree and is incredibly dynamic in moving him around the field. I think Calvin Ridley kind of adds the Jamar Chase effect to this new Brian Callahan offense. I think that's kind of how they see him and how they would like to use him. So the good news is Brian Callahan gets to add some important weapons, some big time weapons that will give him a similar personnel group that he had in Cincinnati, which is good news for both him and also the Titans' new look offense that should be passing the ball a whole lot more. So Calvin Ridley kind of taking the chains off, if you will, having a wider route tree, being able to kind of move all around the field helps him a ton. This also helps players like Treylon Burks and Kyle Phillips a ton. Kyle's more of your dedicated slot guy. Treylon should be the new slot guy, which he played primarily in college and he excelled at. Treylon Burks breakout season loading. You heard it here first. We'll see kind of how everything shakes out there, but nonetheless, adding Calvin Ridley is a massive upgrade to this offense and changes the way that we should see this offense in general, considering everything that's going to happen from a passing standpoint, right? All the change that's going to come. Center Lloyd Cushenberry is an absolute stud. I love Lloyd Cushenberry. In my first video, I didn't include a center. If I had, it would have been Lloyd. Just year over year made huge strides in the Broncos offense. Lloyd is a very different center than the Titans are used to with Aaron Brewer. Obviously, Ben Jones was kind of that do-it-all, and he was fantastic, but Lloyd is going to come in and be a absolute stopgap at the center. This is a guy who should be the future. Absolutely fantastic in pass pro. Could use some work in getting to the second level and being a more efficient run blocker, but did fairly well last season and graded out really well. So Bill Callahan getting into the fold, getting his hands on him, there should be some serious development that'll happen. And I think we'll be talking about Lloyd Cushenberry as a top 5 center in the league next year, potentially. Continuing the upgrades on the offensive line, Lloyd Cushenberry's teammate from LSU, Shadiq Charles, who played left tackle at LSU, but has been primarily moved into the inside on the offensive line in Washington. Hasn't really played well in particular. I think that offensive line kind of lacks continuity over the past couple of years anyway, so maybe that plays into it. I think there's a good chance that his primary role should be tackle. I think that's a big reason why they signed him. If anybody can turn that guy into a productive offensive lineman, it's going to be Bill Callahan. So kind of excited for Shadiq Charles. I think he played well at left tackle. I'm pretty sure blocking for Joe Burrow, and he was on that really, really good team. So I think that there is some potential that he could return to left tackle or compete at tackle, maybe even right tackle, but nonetheless has the experience on the inside. So should be that versatile swing player that can plug in if there's ever an injury or something like that. So the money was right too. So I think that's a good signing. We have a new backup quarterback Mason Rudolph from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who kind of came online in a big way last season. Towards the end of the year, played some really, really great ball. Brian Callahan at the NFL owners meeting spoke on it today about how he really respects Mason Rudolph's game, thought he is a really good quarterback and will kind of come in and be a sounding board for Will Levis and kind of helping in his development. I mean, Mason Rudolph was in a quarterback room with Ben Roethlisberger. Like, he's played with some talented guys. So hopefully he adds a good bit of value to Will Levis. And then, of course, if there ever was an injury, is going to be able to come in and play some effective ball. I still suspect that Malik Willis is going to come in and compete. I mean, the intangibles are there. He's a talented, physically gifted player. He just needs to be able to kind of figure it out between his ears and get a chance to develop. So I suspect that Malik will still compete, but he's likely going to be QB3 for the entire season. And who knows, might even be cut. Mason Rudolph is an efficient backup quarterback and should play that role really nicely for Brian Callahan. Closing out these free agency signings for new players added to the team, we have Sebastian Joseph, who recently played with the 49ers. He was traded over there towards the end of the year, played for the Chargers and for the Rams. So he's been on some very skilled defensive lines, played alongside Aaron Donald and had some success. So not necessarily stats that are going to jump off the page for you, but very affordable. I think sub $4 million that he's going to make this year. So an affordable depth piece. Very important that we continue to add to the defensive line, but I think Sebastian Joseph will get a chance to kind of show his talent alongside a really good running mate in Jeffrey Simmons, and at the same time still be a great depth piece for really good money. So signing that doesn't like get me excited. I don't jump out of bed for Sebastian Joseph here, get really excited in the morning, but I think he is a really good depth piece for good money. So solid. The team brought back a handful of their own players as well, tendering Jack Gibbons. We'll see inside linebacker Dr. Gibby return. Wide receiver Nick Westbrook-Akine, who has been a guy who year over year has improved and is now staying through a regime change, and that's a good reason. I mean, the guy is a great blocking receiver. He's done a phenomenal job of being a better separator, and his hands have been better. He's been dropping less opportunities and less balls. So overall, pretty excited for, maybe what he looks like. I think he's kind of like the Tyler Boyd of this offense. I think that's probably how Brian Callahan sees him. And you get him for super affordable. So, just a good re-signing overall there. Probably the biggest re-signing though, kicker Nick Folk is back. Thank the heavens. Nick Folk was great for the Titans last season. 30 of 31, was automatic, under 40 yards, and just gave a lot of consistency to that position, which is a big deal coming from a Titans team who really hasn't had that consistency since Ryan Suckup. Overall, really happy with that re-signing. I think that's going to kind of help us get to whatever is going to be the future of the kicker position, surely, after this upcoming season. Running back Julius Chestnut is going to round out the running back room. Chestnut was great for us over the past year or two, played some really valuable snaps in preseason games and looked really good. It's clear that Hassan Haskins they're going to be moving on from him. If you want to talk about a ground and pound approach, Julius Chestnut could do that. I think he's a really good player and great value for the money spent on him. So really happy with that re-signing and like him as RB3 on the team. And the last thing of note wasn't necessarily an addition, more so a subtraction. The Titans released left tackle Andre Dillard, which was a failed experiment, unfortunately, at that spot. Originally signed a 3-year, I think $30 million deal. Was just not the guy. Nonetheless, you cut him, you know, cut your losses, move on. Didn't think that we were going to have much worse left tackle play from the previous year with Dennis Daly, and then here we are. So unfortunately, we are back to square one at left tackle, but now those ties are cut and we can move on. We'll see what the Titans do. I'm pretty sure they're going to address that in the draft, and I have a player that they should go after as well, so stay tuned for that. Jumping into our next topic, we got the L'Jarius Sneed trade. This one was exciting, absolutely blown away. For weeks, it was talked about the Titans were in consideration for L'Jarius Sneed's services, and original reports were having the Titans interested, but probably not going to happen. There was a handful of other teams, the Minnesota Vikings, the Detroit Lions, I think the Giants and the Patriots were interested, a handful of teams, but the big thing was the money for L'Jarius Sneed. Now, I want to address this really quickly because a lot of Kansas City Chiefs fans were upset initially at losing the player. Now they're kind of walking that back, initially saying like, why don't we just keep him, right? He's on a $19 million franchise tag. Why not just keep him, go after and try to, you know, three-peat? And that makes sense, but the one thing that's getting left out is the player element to all of this. L'Jarius Sneed is in a position where he's at the top of his game and he needs to get paid. If L'Jarius plays on the franchise tag and then something happens, you know, God forbid an injury or just playing worse, all of a sudden you enter yourself into a new free agent class with other talent. So maybe he's not the top guy at the end of next season. Maybe some teams that desperately needed him and would pay him the money that he wants, just the market wouldn't be there, right? Like there's tons of factors, right? And even the compensatory pick, everyone's saying, well, if they let him play on the franchise tag and then they lose him, then they just get a third compensatory pick for sure. First off, that's not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed to get a third round compensatory pick. And that compensatory pick happens the year later. The Colts were in it, then they weren't. The Titans were in it, then they weren't. The Titans were always going to land L'Jarius Sneed in this situation. I think that's very clear. They were one of the teams that had the strongest need for a cornerback and had the most money to spend. The Titans were the most competitive in not only offering the compensation, but willing to offer the contract that L'Jarius Sneed was asking for, and that is a really big part of it. So ultimately, the trade happens. L'Jarius Sneed gets traded for a 2025 third-round pick, plus a 7th-round 2024 pick swap. It wasn't just about the compensation. It was also about the contract that came with it. So reportedly, what we're looking at is 4 years, $76 million, with $55 million guaranteed. Here's the good news for the Tennessee Titans. The current contracts and where they sit, I think L'Jarius is sitting at like 7th or 8th in terms of like highest overall contract money. But there's players that haven't gotten paid yet at that position that are going to get broken off way more than what the Titans are paying for L'Jarius Sneed. Sauce Gardner, Patrick Surtain, there's a couple of guys that have not been paid yet that are going to be getting paid in the next year plus. So overall, Rand Carthon and the strategy to strike hot on top talent is proving to work out. You trade Kevin Byard just in time as the safety market collapses, so he predicted that accordingly. You trade for L'Jarius Sneed and you get him for the money that you got him for. 19 million AAV is like 5th highest or 6th highest in the league currently. Contracts for that position group are only going to go up. Then you know, before that, you re-sign Jeffrey Simmons in the defensive line market before it exploded. Time and time again, so far in the past year, Rand Carthon has proved that he is ahead of the curve when it comes to signing these players. So far, huge fan of this. I love the L'Jarius Sneed trade. I think it puts us in a position that we've arguably never been in, maybe once or twice, where we have a cornerback trio that is absolutely shut down. There were 4 players that did not give up a touchdown last year in one-on-one coverage. 2 of those 4 players are on our team. There's L'Jarius Sneed and, surprisingly, Roger McCreary. Impressive, right? So you want to talk about my man catch no balls? The Malcolm Butler, Logan Ryan, Kevin Byard era of secondary. My man catch no touchdowns. This is a absolute star-studded secondary for the Tennessee Titans. Exactly what Denard Wilson said he wanted to do in his opening presser is coming to fruition. This is absolutely huge for the Titans. Now, some needs in some other areas, like on the defensive line and in the middle of the defense at Mike and Will linebacker, but Nonetheless, huge improvements so far in this offseason, and the L'Jarius Sneed trade is just the cherry on top. So really excited. The Titans had the money to spend. They needed to spend it. They needed to try to build this team around Will Levis and give him a legitimate shot while you got him on the rookie contract. And people need to remember, Will Levis was drafted in the second round, so you don't get the 5th-year option that teams normally get to toy around with whenever they have that quarterback. So we lost a year of cheap salary, essentially. You got to figure this thing out now. We can't sit around and try to slow build, play with the money. Go spend your money. Love the strategy so far. Off to a phenomenal start, and we'll see how the rest of it plays out going into the draft. To close this one out, I have a handful of players that you guys should keep an eye out for the Tennessee Titans in the second and third wave of free agency. Not necessarily before the draft, but likely maybe shortly before, but likely shortly after. And then as we get closer into training camp, these are guys that I would really like to see the Tennessee Titans go after. They're affordable, they're great depth pieces, and some of them starters even, and I think makes a ton of sense for the Titans in its current state. Before we jump into that, though, I want to mention today at the NFL owners meetings in Orlando, Florida, Rand Carthon talked about everything that's been happening over the free agency period and talked about all the specific signings and the trade and all that good stuff. He mentioned this little nugget in his interview with Jim Wyatt that he basically said they're still in conversation with a handful of their own free agents from their team that have expressed interest in wanting to re-sign. Now, a handful of players have left. We've lost a lot of players to free agency, some that were definitely targets to be re-signed, but there's a handful also that are still available that I think the Titans could bring in. And so worth noting and mentioning a couple of guys here. Chris Hubbard, who played phenomenal, really, at right tackle before his season-ending injury. He's available, and he could be your stopgap at right tackle. This doesn't have to be hard. It could be easy. Him and NPF could go to work and compete in camp. Best man wins, and who knows? I think that makes a ton of sense. Terrell Edmonds had some quality snaps in depth at safety. He's still available, and I think the Titans could make sense for him to bring him back. A player that I am really high on and would love to have back is nose tackle Kyle Peko. Kyle Peko came in and had some really big games for us. I believe it was the Texans game. He was a menace before he got hurt and ended his season as well. Kyle Peko, Jaleel Johnson, who also came in as a depth, one tech, was fantastic for us as well. So I think that could make some sense. And of course, backup offensive lineman Corey Levin, who has been on and off the team, on and off the practice squad for a handful of years, basically through the whole Mike Vrabel era. So I think Corey Levin could come in and make some sense as a backup center or just a backup interior guy that has some continuity with some of the returning players as well. Finally, let's get to the free agents that I am really high on. A handful of players, mostly defensive players, that I think would be fantastic fits and could solve some important holes on the team that you might not be able to address in the draft, which is why I think there's a good chance these are guys that get signed after the draft. But let's talk about them now. Defensive lineman Calais Campbell, who has been a menace in the NFL, would be an absolute dream to have him and pair him in the interior defensive line with Jeffrey Simmons. Big, physical, nasty player who seems to still have more football in the tank. He just finished up his last stint with the Atlanta Falcons and is available on the market. Would love to see him come in and plugged in if the Titans don't address nose tackle in free agency or in the draft. Middle linebacker Shaq Leonard is the guy who should come in and wear the green dot for the Tennessee Titans. You could bring him in on a 1-year cheap kind of prove it deal, similar to what you did with Azeez Al-Shire. He comes in and he's the veteran presence. He was healthy towards, in his stint with the Philadelphia Eagles. Didn't play very well, so I understand people's pause and hesitation there. But overall, he's been healthy for a good while now. Finally is probably feeling more normal, and he gets a chance to come in against his division rivals and make a mess of the division and be a big part of the Titans defense, which could certainly use his experience and leadership. Safety Marcus May is the next player that I am targeting here, and this one's not a surprise. The Titans have been linked to him. I believe they hosted Marcus as well, so it would make a ton of sense. He would play opposite of Amani Hooker and has experience with Denard Wilson and some of the coaching staff. This one is just a no-brainer. I think there's a good chance that this one gets done if the Titans aren't in on Justin Simmons for maybe a cheaper price. Lastly, I have a guy who I've been pretty high on all offseason, and he hasn't quite signed. Tackle Mekhi Becton would be a fantastic fit plug him in at right tackle if you find your left tackle in the draft, plug him in at left tackle if you go receiver at pick 7 and you don't find a guy that you love. He makes a ton of sense. That's going to do it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. Going to be returning to this format, the podcast, but probably in a live format. I enjoy like kind of the post-production cut up edited videos, but I think there's just like a ton of fun with like live shows. So I'm a big fan of putting one of those together for you guys and having people interact in real time. And I really want to try that out. So expect the next one of these to come out live on YouTube. We'll stream to X as well and just kind of get you guys involved in the conversation. If you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe, drop me a like, toss me a comment as well. Let me know what you guys think of all of these additions here in free agency. And I'm really excited to see you guys in the next one. Peace.